Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. 2, because I'm a fan of punk music. And 3, it's just more fun, right? If this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. Please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Jeff Gallino, who is the CTO and founder of CoalMiner. I also, alongside Jeff, I have one of his colleagues, Conrad Liburd, who is an AI feature engineer. Conrad, I hope I got your name kind of pronunciation kind of right, but you can correct me kind of when we get into it. But Jeff and Conrad, welcome to the show, and yeah, great to have you on.
Great to be here.
Yeah, great to be here. And by the way, you did say it correctly, and I was in shock because normally people butcher it. So that's kind of what so you did a great job.
Thank you, man. Thank you. So anyway, I wonder if you could just help us by introducing yourselves and telling us a little bit about the work that you do. Jeff, why don't you kind of step up to the plate first?
I appreciate that. Jeff Gallino, I am, as most founders are at some point in the company, the Chief Technology Officer. I'm responsible for kind of long-term strategic roadmap guidance, as well as research and AI. And then I also happen to own strategic direction around alliances.
Awesome. Conrad?
And here at CoalMiner, I am a feature engineer. So the majority of my work is basically figuring things out from a user's perspective, in addition to generating features based on my understanding of the data and just my understanding of the call center world in general, since I spent so much time being an agent and working in QA.
Perfect. Now, in the run-up to this, we've been trying to get this organized for a wee while now. But I must kind of say that it was when your team reached out to me, they reached out to me with a pitch that was entitled, "On a scale of 1 to 10, how racist is your AI?" And I was like, what? That's probably the most, oh my God, kind of like email subject line that I've had in a long time. And I thought, I have to find out about this kind of like more. So we've arranged this time to talk about this and really dig into it, which can, for many people, be a really quite a sensitive subject. We've all talked about AI and bias and data bias and all that sort of stuff, and how we should try and eliminate the bias entirely from our systems and our data. But you guys are advocating a different approach. So first of all, I want to ask you why. Tell me about kind of the whole kind of like thought process, and tell me about why you're taking a very different approach.
Sure. You made a statement. This notion of eliminating bias in a model or an AI-driven system, or really any kind of trained anything. I think it's absurd to say something like that, because bias is inherent to the data, and all models are trained by data.
Right.
And so what you have to commit to is eliminating the data to eliminate the bias, because bias is implicit in basically everything, even
right.
if it's a bias to kindness, if it's a bias to anger, it's a bias to ego, it's right there.
Okay.
And so recognizing that, we believe, is the first step to embracing it, right? And the way we try to embrace it is to recognize it's there and use it as a way to understand how it might be informing your conversations, informing the dialogue you're having with customers.
Okay. And so it's just about it's not about it's well, first of all, you have to acknowledge that everything is biased, I guess, or we're all biased. And that's what you're saying. And then the second thing is almost a bit like when we recognize it, then we spot it, then we've got to use that opportunity to learn from it. Is that right?
We believe so, yes.
Perfect. Now, I mean, Conrad, what I wanted to do was ask you actually because a question, because you mentioned you worked in call centers for a long, long time, and unfortunately, you've been on the receiving end of racist kind of comments from customers, and which I'm really sorry to hear about, but not now. Normally, kind of many of these organizations, or many organizations that might experience that when they're doing some of their, their QA work around, call and kind of text analytics and things, may actually eliminate some of those conversations, like what you experienced from their analysis, but aligned to this different kind of approach that you're taking about identifying kind of bias and then and almost leaning into and understanding it. I mean, what do you think? What harm is done when organizations turn a blind eye to some of the to like racist customer conversations or any type of kind of bias conversations? What do we lose when we do that?
I think you lose a lot. Speaking from the position of somebody that's been on the other end of that, where you're the one that's taking the brunt of the racism or the bias. What I do is I lose trust in the people that are calling in, trust in them being, decent human beings, and then also who you work for.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the most important things is, when you have an employee, one of the things you want to do is make them love coming to work and make them want to work for you, not just do a job. So if you're going to be on their side, that needs to be shown at a lot of different levels, one of which is taking care of them in those phone situations because they're exposed. If you're on a phone call every day, you're taking 50, 60 conservatively. Some people are taking over 100 a day. You're exposed and you're taking a brunt of everything that went wrong that you probably didn't have anything to do with. And it's a constant barrage. And it really helps as an agent if you know that if this event comes up, because you're always quick to be graded on something simple. So maybe we forgot to say the company name at the beginning of the call. They'll tell you, they'll bring that up, but nobody's running to you saying, oh my God, I just heard that call where they called you the N-word, or they called you, in case of a woman, where they made a derogatory comment against them because they were female. Nobody's running up to you and go, oh my God, how are you doing? Let's take a minute to talk about this. How do you feel? We have your back. Don't take a call. Like those kind of things, are absent, and they really shouldn't be. One of the things, that's why it's so important to be able to have access to this data to understand exactly what the impact is on the agent when this occurs, because that's going to impact the way they behave on the following call, because there's a loss of trust with customers once that happens. So I'm thinking, you know what, my next call is going to be the same thing. I put my guard up. I'm not going to give 100%. I just want this person off the phone.
I mean, I guess there's also these kind of there's two sides to it, right? And what you're alluding to there's the real time conversations and the impact they have, and then there's kind of the conversations that happen when you're doing a QA or an analytical sort of process. So I mean, I guess what should kind of organizations be kind of doing? I mean, around kind of I guess let's handle the real-time sort of thing first, because you've experienced it, Conrad, and Jeff, you'll have seen it from a client perspective as well. I mean, do you agree that there's two different domains here? There's a real-time and what we'd be doing in real time when we encounter some of these things, and then there's also the kind of the analytical side of things, which is a separate kind of domain. Is that fair?
I think it is. I think it is. I think in the real-time domain, Conrad just hit it very, very well when he said, there's an expectation that if the organization can react, then I'll feel and I can give 100% on my next engagement. If we're doing post-call analysis, where we're maybe analyzing it at the end of the day, at the end of the shift or something like that, the job is a little harder to bring the agent back into the fold. But hopefully what we can use is the weight of data to help and say, hey, we know you had a bad call, but you had 49 others that were really good. here's what we're going to do to try to help you on this first one, on that one that wasn't good. Unfortunately, I think that it's higher than people expect. I think that if they think these are very rare, every now and again kind of things, they're wrong.
Yeah.
My best example of that is we were working with outsourcers, and the customers, well, our customer who was the outsourcer was asking us, our downstream callers are telling us that they can't understand the agent very well. And it turns out that wasn't the case. We could prove it acoustically, mathematically, that the understanding was high. But what it was biased. They were like, I need to speak to an American, right? Or hey, get somebody else on the phone who's from the US or, from Canada or from the UK. And that kind of bias was very high frequency. And so we were helping the company decide how they wanted to handle that.
Mm-hmm. And if I can come back to the kind of just the kind of the real-time domain, I was thinking about that, Conrad. I mean, what should organizations be doing sort of, to protect their employees? I mean, should it be a case of like, should we thinking about putting in place a, I don't know, a culture or a system where somebody kind of has this, that they just almost like, let's assume that things go back to some sort of normality and that people can either physically or digitally put their hand up and go like, I need a minute because I've just had a really bad or rough call that's, discriminatory and then it's just not nice. And, and we need to kind of almost have a management system that allows for that and kind of like, and takes that into our kind of like, into our thinking. And therefore, rather than expecting people just to kind of put their game face on and get ready for the next one. I mean, is that something we need to factor into our thinking, given it's so, as Jeff was saying, it's so prevalent?
Yeah, I absolutely think that would have to be a part of a call center's game plan. One of the things that call centers like to hang their hat on is just these empty metrics.
Yeah.
So like ops time. So this person took, 2-3 minutes of ops, but that's an empty metric to me because me taking 2 minutes to take another call, there's a reason behind that.
Yeah.
And what we allow customers to do or clients to do is understand what's behind that ops time more clearly. And you have to put some kind of structure, some kind of plan in place to handle situations where something occurs on a call that is really hurtful to an individual. And there's a lot of things that happen on calls. And remember, you're taking so many of them throughout the day. And a lot of times, you're always looking at numbers, but what's the point in taking 15, 16 calls in an hour if 15 of them are going to be emotionally charged because of one that took place before?
Sure.
So it definitely needs to be something in place to where you can identify when it happens, which we have the technology to do so. And then when that happens, you need to be able to tell the agent, hey, let's talk about this. Just being able to have a conversation with the agent and them knowing that you're looking out for them is huge. It's huge. There's a lot of policies that are in place in some places where if you get an abusive caller, I've been on the end of that and they're telling you don't hang up. Think about that. Somebody's abusing you. You're telling them you can't hang up on a customer. How do you're not building trust with me as an agent versus giving me the freedom to make that decision based on the conversation that's going on. And then in turn, that's going to train your customer because there are some people that literally call centers just to do that, to abuse people and don't get anything done.
I mean, that's a system of control in and of itself, right?
Yeah, it definitely is. And, setting something up that is geared toward an agent feeling empowered and valued, because as a call center agent, a lot of times you don't feel valued, you just kind of feel like a number. Having them feel valued is key to them performing better than you would expect, above and beyond. But, you have to put processes in place that make sure that your call center agents feel valued.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's like, it just shows that, as you say, you care about them, but you also says that actually, I've got your back, you know what? And this is not okay. And we got you here, and we're kind of willing to, to figure, fold that into kind of how we do things to kind of like to make things kind of better for the agents, for the employees.
Exactly.
So, I mean, if I go into the kind of the analytics side of things, I mean, it's like, Jeff, you talked about it kind of being kind of prevalent and stuff. And so how are organizations, what are you seeing, and how are organizations using their sort of like their analytics and their, I guess, the QA to, one, identify these kind of like types of calls, these types of conversations, and two, kind of what are they deciding to do about it? What are they kind of like learning from it? And do you know what I mean? It's almost like you can spot them and go,
I do.
what?
I
And
do.
then what happens? A lot of people will be like going, what do we do?
Well, there are organizations out there that have responded altruistically, right? They're like, this is bad, we need to correct it.
Yeah.
But honestly, most of them respond to it in a financial scenario. What they realize is that it's really bad for business. and
and
what
had
I
to
mean
get to
by
that level.
well, and I don't want to make light of it, because it's actually kind of a positive at some level, because what they see is when there's a disruptive caller. Conrad talks about people who call to just egg on the agents and just be bad.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I'm not going to shy away from the term good and bad here. They're being bad. And that bad behavior costs the company money. And so what they want from these analytics is they want a way to identify those people, potentially get in the way, block them from calling, send them to another channel, like let's flip them over to make them type it. They're lazy fundamentally, so they're not going to, right? Being confronted with the words you say in typed form really does change behavior. We've had customers that use it to build profiles to figure out a way to take that bias and turn it into something they can sell to. So, for instance, if if somebody pushes back and they're like, I only buy American-made products.
Right.
Like, great. Well, then why don't we make a big deal out of the fact that our agents, who maybe you're treating poorly, they're American. Treat them like Americans.
Right.
And it seems like an odd thing, but it does change behavior. There are there's a lot of examples. I mean, but moving them to seeing the money, but where I really like to bring people to is what I'll call the indirect money, which is if you take good care of your employees, they show loyalty, they stick around. That is actually worth a lot of money to companies.
Well, in terms of kind of like, reduction in training costs and onboarding and, turnover and all that sort of stuff, that's tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars kind of every year.
Absolutely. And that translates into the service they give, which translates into the purchases. And I mean, when you have an engaged, excited, safe employee that doesn't feel vulnerable, they will do amazing things for you.
Yeah. Here, here's a thing that I was thinking about. It's like, have you seen any organizations that have taken it to the extent that they've identified some of these types of calls, these conversations that are nasty, they're discriminatory, kind of in whatever level, and then to whoever, that they've actually used it to, if they establish a pattern kind of to it, that they end up kind of pushing back to customers and saying, look, that's not how we work here. That's not good. That we don't like that, and we'd, to almost to the point where they were saying we are choosing not to have you as our customer anymore.
Absolutely have seen that. Conrad touched on it a little bit, is empowering the employee to take action based on what they're confronted with is a huge step in that direction, because suddenly the caller, let's just call them the caller, not a customer, the caller realizes that the customer isn't always right, which is something we've had that silly aphorism beat into us ever since I can remember, and it's just not true, right? The reality is a good organization, and I love the idea of a punk organization, is going to say, you know what, we're pretty confident that behavior isn't right, and so we're not going to reward it. Giving them not just the capability of disconnecting them, but in some cases blacklisting.
Because as you say, kind of the norm would be to, and this is kind of like, I think, normal in many societies, is that they almost assume that ugly behavior and negative kind of beliefs, as it were, are in the minority, and that's a form of delusion in of itself. And they kind of deflecting, oh no, it's not that bad, and it's not such a big deal. I mean, so how's the approach around leaning into this and trying to learn from it and figure out that to deal with it as a reality and to try and minimize its impact on the kind of the people in the business and things? I mean, has that approach proven sort of controversial in some parts or with some folks and some clients because they just find it, I don't know, hard, difficult, uncomfortable to talk about?
I think that you kind of answered your own question, right? It is.
Oh dear.
It is always a little bit controversial, but at the same time, people respect results more in some cases than behavior, and that's a pity unto itself. But the reality is you can't please everybody, and so instead of trying to please everybody, choose to do the right thing and let that be the thing that pleases the people you care about, which in this case is employees and valued customers. I honestly think it drives better behavior out of the non-bad customers. And in other words, they hear about this and they go, heck yeah, that's my airline, or heck yeah, that's my dog food delivery company. And I'm going to give them more business because of the way they treated their own employees.
Yeah. No, completely. I think that's this how this whole experience kind of thing is not about necessarily about what we do. It's about how we do it, right? And that word goes around pretty quickly, I think, amongst kind of people. But also another kind of question I was thinking about is that this year, I mean, 2020 is, I guess, the year of the corona, not the beer. And it's produced a huge amount of anxiety and stress across the globe, and we've seen massive rises in drive to digital and massive rises in call volumes and email volumes and chat volumes and all that sort of stuff. I mean, have you seen that an uptick in these type of conversations just as a function of kind of like stress, and does stress bring out the kind of the worst in us?
I believe we've seen the opposite.
Okay.
When people engage in one-on-one behavior versus group on group or group on one, they tend to expect and demand more empathetic response. We did a study recently that the average call had gone up quite a bit. I don't have the number on me, but it was a significant amount, and it was seeking to comfort each other. It was seeking to find common shared ground, talking about your pandemic experience, talking about your economic experience, and the organizations that responded positively to that. In other words, they informed their employees how to talk about that. They gave them leeway to do that. Found that their customer service ratings, as well as the purchase ratings, went up significantly. It pays to be empathetic.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I think that's one of we've seen a massive demand for that and a need for that, and I think that organizations are doing it, are trying to be more empathetic. But I guess it's the question is like how do they sustain that and things. But I mean, I guess over time. So I guess my kind of question would be just as almost to bring this into some sort of kind of like real examples or kind of reality in terms of particular scenarios. Do you have a couple of examples that you could share, so Conrad and Jeff, about organizations that have embraced this sort of approach that you're advocating and what they've done and how it's impacted them, just so we can share a couple of stories? No names, no names need to be shared, obviously, but just a couple of story examples that would help kind of bring all this to life.
I think what I've seen in working with customer data, since I work with so much, there is one particular e-commerce company which does a wonderful job of just that in general. And I guess that would be amplified during the pandemic, where when you call them, the conversation doesn't feel like, I like to call it like dirty scripted.
Right.
So it's almost like like a sleazy guy trying to hit on a girl. Like
Oh,
sometimes you
no.
call a company and it feels like I'm like, stop telling me you like me so much. I just want you to solve my problem. And it's like they get a call and it's such a natural conversation. It's almost like two friends having a conversation on the phone. You never feel like they're trying to like get off my line, I have to take another call. It's just natural, it flows. And
Uh-huh.
sometimes, which amazes me, and it still does because of all the calls that I've heard from different companies, like when things go wrong, the customer is not angry
Right.
because they just enjoy the experience of dealing with this company, because they're dealing with them naturally. They're not being sleazy with them and telling them how loyal they've been for 15 years and we really love you.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
just natural. And I think that's a great approach for a company to take, to just be natural with callers because they just want somebody to listen to them, be real, and help them.
Does that mean that, so like then because you've taken that approach and you've been real and you've got that, you build up that sort of almost like rapport, as it were. So if somebody then steps over the line in whatever way, then it's easier to kind of like to pull them back from that, or to actually
Yeah,
can call them out on it.
yeah, absolutely. Once you build that rapport with a customer and it's a natural rapport, it's not anything that's forced, it's easier to give them bad news and it's easier to pull them back out of any kind of funk they might get into, depending on the twist and turns of the conversation, because they pretty much trust you
Yeah.
because you've had conversations and maybe you shared something personal with them. Oh, my daughter just graduated from, oh my God, my daughter just graduated too. Like once you create that bond, they're more willing to listen to what you say and then respond differently than if it's just a cold, fake kind of responses that you give throughout where you really don't feel any sort of connection with the person.
Cool. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, because then it's like it's if it's very kind of like scripted, then it's very unlikely there's going to be much rapport, and therefore if somebody kind of like adopts a very kind of almost like aggressive or discriminatory approach, then it's hard to really pull them back on it
Exactly.
because there is no kind of like basis within which to do it, because it's all kind of transactional in many ways.
Mm-hmm. That's the key word there, transactional.
Perfect.
Very
And
good word.
Jeff, have you got an example that stood out for you that you like?
I do. We did a study recently where we asked people during the pandemic how they were responding to certain kinds of customer service. And one of the most surprising things that came about, and it kind of echoes what Conrad was saying, is that people were responding either flatly or negatively to automation,
Right.
that they wanted the human touch. They felt isolated, and so they wanted that human touch. And the companies that were deploying that automation thought that they were doing a better thing for their customers by making it more transactional,
Mm.
faster. And the customers kind of pushed back on that. And so we've had a couple of companies that have said that they use us to measure that response, that hey, when we use a human versus the automated system, because there's still a human from our perspective, so we're going to still monitor those conversations. Which conversations are going better? And it's little things like, would you believe that people curse more at automation than they do at other humans? I mean,
well,
I'm
you know what? It's
certainly
one of those kind of funny things. Is like you see it kind of on social media. Is people will are more find it easier to type things out than they will be to kind of like say things out loud.
I
And
agree.
it's fascinating. Kind of, it's like braver, kind of like braver via keyboard than via mic.
And as that translates to some of the companies that we're dealing with, being able to kind of take the lid off of that bias, that anger, that profanity, and find a human being again. For me, it comes back to that empathetic response. And those companies that are embracing that, they're letting the data guide them there, as opposed to just knowing, I would air quote knowing,
Yeah.
oh, no, people definitely want a faster conversation. That's not what the numbers are telling us.
Well, faster is also relative, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's all that kind of like it's their perception of like of speed and kind of like time, that sort of thing. That idea is that time flies when we're having kind of fun or things are just going well. It's the
Right.
same sort of idea, right?
I think so, yes.
So actually, I think, tell me if this is kind of a crazy thought. So I just had a bit of a crazy thought. Do you think there's a way to kind of like, say, in automated kind of conversations, as it were, for a system to pick up language that's being kind of like thrown at kind of agents that is deemed not appropriate, that the system then kind of like almost as a big red warning light starts flashing and then sends a message back and going, we're just thinking you need to kind of roll consider your words more carefully because that's not appropriate.
Adrian, I love that idea. I believe, and a big part of my job at CallMiner is to predict the future and then get proven wrong. But one of the predictions that I make is I think customer experience, kind of the measurement scorecard that we bring our companies and employees under, I think soon we'll see people giving scorecards to customers on an interaction as a way to help them understand how they could have done better and gotten more. And so I don't think it's actually outside of the realm that in our video communication world where call centers, you might be talking to the agent via Zoom. And I don't see why you couldn't put a score on the screen for both parties. Hey, this is how the system thinks you're doing. And by the way, customer, you keep acting like this, and we're going to bounce you off the call.
Yeah, well, yeah. Or you end up with
threshold.
you end up with this kind of like somebody comes in waving their finger at you, just going like, "Stop that, young man."
Well, and you laugh about that, but I think that these Zoom conversations will be avatar based primarily. It'll be a human being talking to an agent. The agent will sit behind an avatar.
Yeah.
And I think what will happen is those avatars will over time migrate toward images that people want to not exhibit this behavior. So, matronly, that's the right word.
Yeah.
Motherly, or in some cases, like the stern dad grandfather look, or sometimes it might be the open faced, super happy young lady. And it depends on what, and so it sounds bad, but those kinds of responses could actually be a part of the dialogue. Like, oh, you just upset me, so I'm putting on my upset mother face for a while as a feedback mechanism to you.
Right. And so I love the idea. I mean, I sort of love the idea of it, and the idea of how we can, in real time, sort of like monitor and educate ourselves and just kind of populations and society and kind of general. And then and the flip side, I also kind of think that I just wish we didn't need to, and I sort of worry about that kind of overarching kind of like George Orwell 1984 controlling the way that people speak, and monitoring monitoring that. And I know it's a fine balance. And we've got to figure out the kind of right way, but sometimes I just wish that we didn't have to. But that's just me. Kind of, I'll take a step off my ideal kind of like stool right now.
I don't disagree with you, but one thing you get from working with contact center data is you get a sense for the zeitgeist of people is very different than the person, right? And there are always going to be people that are rough, that are bad, saying it out loud. They're not good. And then you're going to have a lot of people that are good, but not as many as you want or hoped for.
Yeah. Yeah, no, completely. So I'll tell you what, let me kind of ask you kind of like both a two-part question. So the first one is, we've come through this last few months, which have been, let's say, interesting in air quotes, and challenging, as well at the same time for kind of lots of different people in lots of different kind of ways. So to both Conrad and you, Jeff, can you tell me two things? One is like, what has stood out for you the most in the last kind of like few months? in terms of the thing that you just go on, wow, that's the big thing that's really stood out for me in this sort of whole sort of space. And also, given all of that, what's the one thing you would recommend companies do if they were to wanted to really improve their service and their experience? So, Conrad, why don't we start with you first? That's a long question.
I know, right? I think one of the things that stood out to me is as much as we keep saying that agents are going away, they haven't. And they're more important now than ever. And I just find it, so our technology keeps evolving and advancing. So there are certain things that you can do that normally you would have to wait for. So who goes to a bank anymore and stands in line to talk to a teller to cash a check? Nobody. You can do it via your phone, and you can do all these different things. And there's so many different services you can do on your phone and just get it done. But one of the things that still strikes me in this day and age is the technology is advanced. We can do all these things. But if something goes wrong, companies still have the hardest time resolving it.
Right.
So, and then there's a growing disconnect with companies and understanding what world you're living in. We're living in a 5-second world. Everything needs to be done in 5 seconds. I don't wait for videos to load on YouTube anything more than like 3 seconds before I think, oh my God, something is wrong. So if you're consistently living in this type of world 96% of the time, I don't want to go backwards to 1984 where I called you and I gave you information to the IVR, which never carried over to the individual that answered the phone that asked for me again. And they have all this technology available to them allegedly on their end, but they can't answer questions efficiently. They can't come to conclusions efficiently. They can't connect the dots and think out of the box. And that's the part that still strikes me as continuing, because I worked in that situation for years. And I would think, based on where we are with technology and the way that we can connect information, we're still in a place where if I call you about a package that's missing, you have no clue where it is, and you can't give me a resolution without me intervening. That's another thing that strikes me as weird. If I call you about something and it goes unresolved, right? There has to be a time frame that's expected for it to be resolved in, where certain steps have to happen. So if that time frame passes and nothing took place on that situation, you should be contacting me, or you should come up with another resolution. I shouldn't have to do anything. But unfortunately, that doesn't exist. And I find that extremely strange. And I think that's where a lot of companies are losing the battle and they don't realize it.
Yeah. Perfect. Jeff, what do you think?
I kind of want to jump on the Conrad bandwagon on there for a minute.
Do it, man, do it.
When we talk about empowerment and at the same time talk about having customers want an empathetic human response, I think Conrad hit it square on the head. I think what people are asking is, hey, move the automation behind the human, make the human more responsive, empower the human with automation and make it invisible to me. I don't care how they know that today's my birthday. I don't care that that their system didn't tell me what happened on the IVR, right? I want to do is solve my problem, but do it in a nice way, an empathetic way. And so I think, especially in the real-time domain, we're seeing a lot of technology conversations, at least from our perspective, of how do we help the agent be better, not replace the agent. And part of that is actually replacing the agent with the customer not knowing it. We take away a lot of the mundane tasks that the agent has to do through, RPA style automation or real-time alerting that the agent's responding to. And I'll give you a real example of that. We were on a conversation with a major bank, and they have a very specific defect tracking process. So if something goes wrong with their app, something goes wrong with their money transfers, direct deposit, anything like that, they really track that and try to keep on top of that. And the agents, when they encounter something like that, and it's not very often, have a pretty deep amount of policy and procedures that they have to work through in order to capture that data. So we did some work for a bank where we said, how about we just do all of that for the agent so the agent can sit there and go, I'm really sorry that happened. Oh, it looks like we fixed the problem. And oh, we're going to refund you this fee. So you don't even have to ask me for that refund.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do that, you fundamentally change how people view those agents. And what have we done? We really have automated a lot of things, and we're turning that agent into a high knowledge worker, and then people, a people worker,
Yeah.
an interface. So that's what we're seeing now, and I'm suggesting is going to come very soon.
Perfect. I mean, and just sort of looking a little bit kind of like further forward as well, and just a bit more broadly, is that what do you think kind of some of the big challenges are up ahead that we're going to need to sort of navigate when it comes to this idea of just improving the overall service and experience that we deliver to customers, and also kind of, I guess, to employees as well, because if you help one of you and you help the other, and vice versa, I believe.
I mean, me personally, I think it comes down again to a word I've used a few times today, which is empowerment. And I think Conrad started us off on that one, is we empower the agent. And at some level, we use that empowerment as a shield against entitlement, because a lot of the bias leads toward an entitlement position. Customer's always right, dude, you've got to give me that credit. I don't have to, right? Especially when you're being abusive to me.
Do you think also, because sorry for jumping in there, do you think that also there's like that the empowerment, because empowerment also kind of flows from how an organization is sort of structured and managed and led as well. So there has to be there's going to need to be a change in I guess mindset and behavior around leadership and management as well. Do you not think?
Absolutely. Have you heard of the Kanban process?
The which one? The Kanban, yes.
Kanban, yeah. This idea, I believe I'm thinking of the right one, and I want to make sure I don't mess it up. No, I'm thinking the andon. I always get the word confused. There's something called the andon cord.
Okay.
And it's the idea that the lowest worker can stop the entire process if there's a defect. And I would consider bad behavior a defect. And so to your point, that empowerment has to come from the senior management. If it's just policy empowerment with no real backing from management, it will be abandoned almost immediately, because somebody working in a contact center is unfortunately fairly powerless unless you make them powerful. And since they are most of the time your frontline with customers, it's to your advantage to make them powerful.
Perfect. Conrad, anything you want to add on that in terms of what you think some of the big challenges are that we need to kind of keep an eye on going forward?
Yeah, I completely agree with Jeff. It leads towards empowerment, and I guess changing the perception of how important is that resource. And the most important resource in any company is the people. There's so many different perspectives that individuals bring, and I think this gets lost so much. You can't switch people out, because every person consumes reality differently. So you don't realize how much power that talent that you have has that can contribute to your company, because they're consuming all this information about your company and what you're doing from different perspectives. So imagine how powerful it would be to have these people empowered, and you're tapping into all these different perspectives. And we're talking about employees that you keep loyal long-term, and they've seen all the things, they know what you've been doing. Because I've been in places where you just keep on bringing in managers, and you just do this vicious circle of, oh my God, I have this great new idea. And then you're like, we did that 2 years ago. No, it's going to work this time. Like, I've been doing this job forever. And then you just keep on doing this vicious cycle where you go in circles over and over again. And that happens because you're not tapping into your resource.
Sure.
You got these people in here, you train them up, and they know everything about your business, and they have different perspectives. It's all about managing those perspectives and really getting the most out of them. And I think if you make that change, then you progress way more as a company. You get way more out of what you're doing on a daily basis.
Here. Yeah. Adrian, if I may, there's,
of course,
I've seen this, and it's a meme that's floating around, and I really think it captures what you're asking to a certain degree. It says, people treat the word respect as how you treat a person, but they also mean respect as how you treat someone that has authority. And what they say is, if you don't respect me, then I won't respect you. And what they really mean is, if you don't give me authority, I won't treat you like a person.
Yeah.
And I really see that in the way these companies can respond. If they give that empowerment to the agent, they give both authority and respect to that agent. And then when the customer recognizes at least one, then they get the other.
I love that idea, and because it speaks to something that that's really kind of core to me, is the idea of you kind of like, I think you should give respect in the first instance every time, because you'll get it back by doing that. So it's almost like you shouldn't assume that authority means that you automatically get respect. You should give respect to the kind of people that are in your charge, and then respect will flow from that kind of naturally. But the problem is that when people get into positions of authority, obviously sometimes they're going to get caught up in the authority kind of position, and how that is somehow means that they automatically should get respect.
Right.
And it's almost a bit like going, but you haven't done anything yet. So just like...
No, you're absolutely right. One thing we haven't really talked about today is that sometimes the bias and sometimes the lack of respect, the lack of empathy does go out as well. Meaning the agent does sometimes, not always, sometimes can treat customers poorly, and they aren't good.
Yeah. I mean, it's like if you're in an organization, it's like, people are both employees and customers, and those two sets kind of overlap, and we shouldn't ignore that at all.
Agreed.
So, gentlemen, anything else that you'd like to kind of like throw into this that we've kind of missed out before I ask you my two funnish kind of questions on the end of this to wrap up this conversation? Anything we've missed that you want to add? No,
we could talk about this all day. It's really an important topic, but no, I think we're good.
Conrad, anything to add?
I think we're good.
Excellent. Well, anyway, so I always like to finish these conversations on with a couple of questions that I've been asking all the people I've been interviewing on this podcast for the last kind of year or so, since I published a book called Punk CX. And what I've been doing is asking almost two word association questions. And the first question is, what one or two words would you use to describe a more punk approach to customer experience? And I'll go to Conrad first.
Mismatched shoes.
Say that again, sorry, sir.
Mismatched shoes.
Mismatched shoes. I like it. And Jeff, what are you going to say?
Well, I'm not nearly as much fun as that. I was going to say provocative.
Well, mismatched shoes can be provocative.
That's true. That's true. You put a clown shoe on with a high heel, that can really...
I tell you what, kind of like the mismatched shoes kind of idea is, I don't know if you can remember when fluorescent socks were a thing, and people used to get the green ones and the pink ones, and then they used to mix them up, and so people used to walk around with one fluorescent green sock and one fluorescent pink sock. I think that's kind of like sort of what you're talking about as well, Conrad, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, and that's still a thing.
Oh, is it still a thing? Oh, crap.
Yeah, fluorescent green is hot.
Oh, I have to get some socks. And so the second question I have is, so what company or brand do you think epitomizes a more punk approach to customer experience? And this time I'll go to Jeff first.
Okay. I'm going to talk about a company that I don't think a lot of people have maybe heard of, but they continue to surprise me. It's called Starlink. It's started by Tesla, and it's an internet service provider that's satellite based. And to give you an example, they signed me up for their beta, and they sent me an email yesterday that said, Starlink better than nothing beta. And I was like, oh no, this is not going to be good. And I open it up and it goes, as you can tell from the title, we are trying to lower your initial expectations. And I really liked this kind of honest approach. Like, hey, we know this isn't what you were hoping for, but it's better than you're going to expect.
I like it. I like it. And Conrad, what brand would you pick?
I don't know I guess if I had to pick a brand, because everything seems to just work, I would have to say Amazon.
Yeah,
I really would.
and I tell you what, and for the at the risk of repeating myself, which I have on a couple of these interviews, I've been kind of telling people this kind of piece of pop, kind of like internet sort of like trivia, and the kind of the question I've been asking them is like, do you know where, if you typed in relentless.com into your browser, do you know where it would go to?
No, where would it?
Amazon.
Really?
Yep.
Yeah, and that makes me sad.
Well, but I think it also kind of tells you everything you need to know about Amazon and what and how they're about, what they're about, right? It's just like this relentless pursuit of they're customer obsessed in many ways, in their own specific way. But I think that's my piece of kind of a pop internet trivia for you. But one you can share with all your friends, because very, very few people kind of know that. I just discovered it by random. Anyway, I ramble. What I want to say, just like bringing it to a close, I just want to say, Conrad, Jeff, thank you for the work that you're doing. I think it is important, and and I just want to recognize that and thank you for that, and also want to thank you for sharing your time and your insight and your experience with us today. That's just been tremendous. So thanks very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
No problem. Thanks for having us.
Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing kind of people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. One final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.